Good morning. We're really excited today. Angie, Sarah, and I have been talking for days about how excited we are about this webinar. To be talking to y'all about prevention. We're going to be doing primary prevention foundations. And a reminder for anyone who is not familiar with us, I'll let Sarah and Angie introduce themselves, but I'm Megan. I'm one of WCASA's technical assistance coordinators. My focus area is evaluation.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah, pronouns are she, hers, and I'm a prevention coordinator here at WCASA.
Hi everyone, my name is Angie and my pronouns are they, them, and I am also a prevention coordinator with WCASA.
And those are all of our emails. You can reach out to any of us about prevention or really anything related to sexual violence. We can make sure that you get in touch with the right person. So to begin, I just want to talk about this concept of a term that might come up as we're having this conversation, moving upstream. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I feel like everyone has heard the river story so many times. But this story is essentially about a person's on a walk and they're on a walk by a river. It's a peaceful day. They're enjoying their day in the sunshine, and then they see somebody who's struggling in the water, trying to swim and is drowning. So they get this person out and then they go back to enjoying their day. As though that's not like a huge traumatic thing. They get the person out and go back to their day, and then they turn around and there's another person in the water. They get that person out, and this keeps happening over and over again. So finally they go upstream on the river. And they see that there's a place that there's a broken bridge that folks are just falling into the water there. So they patch up that bridge and make sure that folks can cross safely. And that's what we're referring to when we talk about moving upstream, going up to where the source of the problem is and preventing things before they happen. Does that make sense? Great. So this is what we're talking about when we say primary prevention. Is primary prevention focuses on addressing those drivers of violence, the primary causes. And then secondary prevention looks at the changing the trajectory for folks that are higher than average risk. Tertiary prevention is focused on supporting survivors. And I know that in our field, we don't think of that as being prevention, but it is a piece of it. It aims to prevent the recurrence of violence. Another way to look at this is primary prevention and risk reduction being the other two. I want to really quickly mention that I don't think that risk reduction inherently means that a strategy is bad. I think that sometimes folks take it that way when you tell them that something they're doing is not primary prevention, or tell them that a strategy that they think is really exciting isn't primary prevention. It doesn't mean that we don't want to do it. It just means that it doesn't get at those root causes. We live in an imperfect world. We live in a world that we have to be able to, I have to be able to talk to my niece before she leaves for college about things that she can do, keeping an eye on her friends, keeping an eye on her drink at a bar, those sorts of things that she shouldn't have to do, frankly. That shouldn't be the thing that we're relying on, but it's still a tool in our toolbox. It's still a part of this because cultural change takes time. The reason that I bring this up is because there are some problems with risk reduction. It often focuses on what victims can do to prevent their own victimization and increasing personal safety, which again are things that they're tools in our toolbox, but they also can reinforce victim blaming messages. And the onus of responsibility in that situation really is not where we want it philosophically, and it's not where the field wants it philosophically. So we're going to do a quick activity based off of that, just some polls. And actually, oh no, I can start them. Okay. So for these, we're going to do a scenario and then answer whether or not it's risk reduction on a poll. So in this first one is an elementary school wants to provide a session aimed at child sexual abuse prevention for young children that focuses on setting and enforcing boundaries, safe and unsafe touch, and identifying safe adults to tell. This is probably a familiar one to you. It's a pretty popular strategy. I'm launching the poll now. Do you think this strategy is primary prevention, risk reduction, or are you not sure? So as a group, we have 10 folks that think it's primary prevention, 7 who think it's risk reduction, and 5 that aren't sure. Does anyone want to share in the chat why they think it is primary prevention? Raising awareness. How about, does anyone want to share why they think it's risk reduction? Anna said, I shared risk reduction because it's not tackling the root cause of child abuse and it's focused on the children. I would agree with you, Anna. Stacy, I think it's a great example that it is raising awareness for sure. But I don't know that lack of awareness is necessarily the problem when we're talking, or the root cause when we're talking about child sexual abuse. It is absolutely a problem in that area, don't get me wrong. So then I want to share a couple examples of ways to move towards being more primary with a strategy like this, because as I mentioned, risk reduction strategies, they're still important, they're still helpful. It's still necessary to teach kids this stuff, but you could add a session for parents that focuses on preventing child sexual abuse at home. You could add content focusing on respecting one another's boundaries and practicing consent with one another, so that then you're also getting at some perpetration risk factors. And you could analyze the school's policies for child sexual abuse prevention best practices and do some work with the school in that area as well. All right, next one. A college campus offers self-defense classes for women as a part of opening weekend. Okay, looks like most people have voted. So I'm going to end polling. So on this one, most folks think that it's risk reduction. A few folks think that it's primary prevention. I'm wondering if folks want to share, why do folks think that this one's risk reduction? Focusing on the victim, yeah. Does anyone want to share why they think it's primary prevention? Doesn't address the root cause. Assuming that you'll have to defend yourself. Being able to defend yourself would reduce your risk of harm. Yeah, just literally looking at the words risk reduction. A few ways that you could be more primary about this is adding a session for all students that focuses on rape culture and consent, focusing content on gender socialization and empowerment. I have heard some folks argue empowerment self-defense is primary prevention, and I will, I tend to fall on the side of that if it focuses on preventing victimization, it's risk reduction as opposed to preventing perpetration. But I do agree that a good empowerment self-defense strategy can affect gender socialization and social norms around that. And that is a root cause. So I do understand that argument. That was sort of why I was asking folks if anybody wanted to share why they thought it was primary prevention. And another thing you could do is analyze schools' policies for creating safe environments and responding to sexual violence, as well as looking at policies related to how survivors are treated when they do defend themselves in an assault. All right, next one. A bystander intervention training educates community members on how to recognize sexual violence and take action to interrupt violence in the moment that it is happening. So this one is a little bit tricky, I will say that. Overall, the group thinks that it is, most of the group thinks that it is primary prevention. We have some folks that think it's risk reduction and some folks that aren't sure. Does somebody want to share why you think it's primary prevention? As I mentioned, this one I was trying to be a little bit tricky. You see something happen, you help. Yeah. Piece about recognizing sexual violence. So I did intentionally use the phrasing, it is happening. So Anna just said, I said primary, now I'm thinking it still doesn't get to the root cause. So this is not a totally agreed upon thing across the field. I will say that there are arguments, there are legitimate arguments for both sides. Personally, I think that bystander intervention is secondary prevention because you're interrupting in that moment. I do think that there are ways to do it as primary prevention, which includes content that focuses on how to recognize and interrupt racist, sexist, and oppressive comments that contribute to rape culture. And talking about being an active bystander before violence is happening and sort of intervening on rape culture itself. Adding content that focuses on ways to take action as a bystander that doesn't involve a police response is especially important because in some instances that police response can escalate violence, as well as it might not be what every survivor wants, obviously, and it might not be accessible to everyone, as well as analyzing local community and school policies around safety for bystanders to take action. All right, I have one more for you. And this is a mutual aid example. So I don't know if folks are familiar with mutual aid, but essentially mutual aid is just neighbors helping neighbors more directly with things. In this case, the example is a mutual aid page on Facebook facilitates a space for community members to help one another and make sure everyone's needs are met. This one's a little different since it's not necessarily like something a local program would do, but. Okay, this one is very close. Just narrowly, the group thinks it's primary prevention, but plenty of folks think it's risk reduction. I would love to hear why folks think both sides. In my opinion, this one is primary prevention, I think. But I included this example in part just to explain that primary prevention might not look like what you expect it to. It might not feel as directly tied to sexual violence as you expect it to necessarily. For example, in this case, crime is the result of unmet needs. So if we think of it in that way, then making sure that everyone in the community's needs are met is primary prevention. I'm not saying that you should write for to start a mutual aid program necessarily, because I don't know that it would get funded, but just that to sort of reimagine your idea of what prevention is. All right. And this is just to remind you of the progression that things have taken through the field from initially being focused just on raising awareness, and then moving towards that risk reduction, those risk reduction approaches that were more focused on victimization, eventually moving towards risk reduction, reducing perpetration. And now we really want to be more focused on cultural change. And remembering that all of these are still pieces of the puzzle. We still have Take Back the Night rallies, even though we're trying to do cultural change, and raising awareness is a piece of that cultural change. And now I will pass it off.
Hello, everyone. So Megan did a great job in describing the difference between risk reduction and primary prevention. So now we're really going to take a look at those root causes. And as mentioned a couple of times, Megan, you can change the slide. The root cause of a lot of what we're seeing is rape culture. So we're going to define, most of you are probably very familiar with rape culture and its definition, but most of you might not have seen this pyramid that kind of really encapsulates what rape culture really is. And what we're seeing at the bottom is the racism, the homophobia, the transphobia, all of those isms, right? That really can kind of strip away all of our protective factors that we see in our structural, the structure of our society. So we really like to use, we're really going to be using this rape culture pyramid moving forward because it really kind of gets at those root causes a little bit more that perpetuates the rape culture. So defining rape culture, just so you know, is a culture where rape is pervasive and normalized due to societal attitudes about gender and sexuality. The practices in which we commonly engage together as communities and as a society. Rape culture refers to pervasive sexual violence being normalized, being supported, and being perpetuated by our attitudes, our actions, our beliefs, and our behaviors. We see that in the upper parts of the pyramid: privilege and entitlement, catcalling, voyeurism, victim blaming, denial that what happened was rape or sexual violence to begin with, minimization of issues related to sexual violence. And we'll see in a couple of slides a little bit more about how rape culture has become the norm of our society. We see how sexual violence is a symptom of a greater disease, and how we can start to address all of that is we need to, you can actually change the slide, Megan, for sure. So as we have the oppression existing and racism existing in our society, we'll still have sexual violence. So this is kind of a way that you can utilize the rape culture pyramid and how we can start to address rape culture to hopefully end rape culture. The rape culture pyramid highlights the structural issues that need to be addressed in order for us to end violence. And the circle then thus provides us with some solutions. The outer structure of the pyramid describes all of the anti-racist and anti-oppressions needed, as we know that racism and oppression are intrinsically tied to sexual violence. So incorporating all of the anti-racism, anti-oppression efforts, we've incorporated that into our SAVIS if you incorporate that into your prevention programming, those will address those root causes of violence, or as we remember from the previous slide that was just a few seconds ago, the base of the pyramid, right? The inner circle brings in those protective factors that help prevent sexual violence. Protective factors are more effective when they're woven into our society. So one thing to keep in mind is experiencing transphobia, like I mentioned before, experiencing transphobia, racism, ableism, or a combination of those. And that's not like what I mentioned wasn't an exhaustive list. It strips away our protective factors. And the ideas and concepts in the middle of the circle here represent the social norms that we need to uplift and train on. So I wanted to mention that these two graphics came from the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance. And it came from a toolkit that you can use to help teach on rape culture. And they give you a blank circle here. And you can also use the one that they filled in like we used here, but you can work with the folks that you're training to help kind of have them brainstorm different ways to fill in the middle of the circle, bring in those things that you can train on, those social norms. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when we look at the problem of sexual violence, we must zoom out to see what are the conditions in which violence occurs. So WCASA did some research on social norms and identified 4 here that are important in ending rape culture: gender socialization, objectification or sexualization, unhealthy sexuality, and normalization of violence. And you can see they kind of all exist within the systems of oppression. Next slide, please. Thank you. So all of these, when you go to the YouTube page, you'll see that the links here you can click on and it'll take you to the toolkit that was created by WCASA. And it'll delve into these social norms a little bit more, and you can use this tool within your training. So one theory on how to prevent sexual violence is to impact social norms that are believed to contribute to the problem. So as we talked about, social norms are the cultural attitudes, values, beliefs that promote social violence. So next slide, please. So we're going to go into a little bit each of those 4 social norms that we discussed. So the first one we're going to talk about is unhealthy sexuality. So unhealthy sexuality is systems that limit access to reproductive health services and choice, sexual entitlement and cultural misperceptions about consent, limited age-appropriate scientific-based education on sexuality, lack of support for autonomy and power to make decisions about one's body. Yeah, like this, we're taught to have shame around our bodies. We're taught to have shame around how our bodies are naturally supposed to do certain things. We're supposed to feel certain things. We are taught to have shame and pleasure. There are ways that we can teach pleasure at all ages. So we are teaching our young people to have a healthy relationship with their body and its natural processes that our bodies are going to do all throughout our lifespan. Next slide, please. So you can see that in the ways that our state laws have limited our reproductive health clinics funding and therefore limit our access to affordable health care. For 10 years, personally, for 10 years in my 20s, my only access to health care was the local family planning clinic. So I was able to get my annual checkups and any health related questions that I had about my reproductive system, I was able to get answered for free. And so that was my access to healthcare for a very long time. Talking about sexual entitlement and cultural misperceptions about consent, who's entitled or praised for being sexual? And we can see that as being cisgender and heterosexual men, and who was punished for for embracing our pleasure and embracing our bodies. And basically it's everyone else. talking about limited age-appropriate scientific-based education of sexuality, our lack of federal laws guiding sexual education put our youth at risk. So for example, and this list is not exhaustive. For example, only 28 states and DC mandate sex education, and 22 states sex ed is not comprehensive. And only 16 states talk about condoms and other contraception. And to me, that's very scary. For instance, for number 4, lack of support for autonomy and power to make decisions about our bodies. State and federal laws, there's a lot of stuff happening right now policy-wise regarding our decisions to have power, our power to make decisions about our own bodies. Next slide, please, thank you. So the next part of the social norms that we are talking about is objectification and sexualization. So this is the gender tolerance of sexual violence, lack of positive models for conflict resolution and discipline, acceptance of violence over systematically oppressed groups, and a culture that glorifies violence. Next slide. So we're gonna split. Sarah and I have split the social norms, so I'm gonna hand it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Angie. So to continue on our conversation about these social norms, next up we have gender socialization. So this is exactly what it sounds like, where we see really rigid gender expectations for a very strict binary sense of gender, right, of men and women, in which men are discouraged from having strong emotional connections with others or expressing their emotions, where we see that women are supposed to behave a really specific way, right? Be sexually subservient, be sexually accessible, and basically the normalization of these really strict binaries in which men are supposed to repress their emotions and be dominant and maybe even violent, and women are supposed to be subservient and even inferior. Next slide, please. And a very important social norm that we want to outline here is the normalization of violence and power. So this really connects back to the bottom of the pyramid that Angie shared with us earlier, in which we see the isms, racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, being at the root causes of sexual violence that occurs within our larger world. So pictured here, we have Ma'Khia Bryant, who was murdered by police at age 16 in 2021, Tamir Rice, who was murdered by police age 12 in 2014, and an activist for murdered and missing Indigenous women. 84% of Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime. 84%. Let that number sink in. It's crucial to appreciate that this violence is often carried out by white folks who are not a part of their community. So the reason that we really want to draw attention to this particular social norm is that sexual violence, again, is that tool of oppression and has a greater burden on marginalized and vulnerable communities. Consider, for instance, the hypersexualization of young Black, Indigenous, and Brown girls. Consider the dehumanization of Black boys and Black men. Consider the violence against trans folks, especially trans folks of color. The experience of racism within our systems of white supremacy and homo and transphobia in extreme heteronormative, cisnormative systems only further serves to harm survivors of sexual violence within these communities. So to reiterate again, this is all connected, right? This is that bottom of the pyramid that we saw, in which our most vulnerable community members are experiencing violence within larger systems on the regular, and so sexual violence is able to be perpetrated because we have this normalization and tolerance for abuses of power and for the use of violence. Next slide, please. So this is something that Megan really touched on earlier when we were talking about the difference between risk reduction and primary prevention. And it's sort of another way to think about the river story. We want to think about social norms as symptoms of a greater illness, right? So we can do something to manage the symptoms, and that's really important. We want to have active bystanders who care about intervening when they see harm going on. We want to have right? Compassionate responses to disclosures, of course, when people share that they're sexual violence survivors. Those are really important things to manage the symptoms of sexual violence. But how do we get to the illness itself, the root cause? I have a kind of unpleasant photo here of some of the symptoms versus the causes of food poisoning. So stick with me for a moment. The symptoms of food poisoning are deeply uncomfortable and in some instances, even really dangerous, right? No one wants to experience food poisoning or suffer through the worst of the symptoms without help. So we encourage people who are experiencing food poisoning to rest, hydrate themselves, eat a bland diet, right? All those things become really important to manage the worst of their symptoms. Because managing the discomfort is crucial when we are responding to the illness, but it's not the same thing as preventing the illness. So on the bottom there, we see some instances of triggers of what might cause food poisoning. What if we altered our environment to prevent these triggers from existing in the first place? So we see lots of pictures of spoiled food, right? So maybe we have food that has expired, food that has been sitting in the back of the fridge for too long, food that sat out on the counter for too long and became unsanitary. If we can change the environment to be rid of these triggers, we can prevent food poisoning from happening in the first place. The same is true for sexual violence, right? We can do something within our environment to change the culture itself and to change the context in which we live so that sexual violence is able to be prevented in the first place. So if you mind clicking the spacebar one more time, Megan, just got some quick text that outlines all this. So we want to think about responsive versus preventative action, right? Responsive action is really crucial, really important, but we can take preventative action as well. We can create social change, environmental changes that prevent harm from happening in the first place. And a great way to do that is to boost protective factors. Next slide, please. So this is some research that came from WCASA in a partnership with DCF, DHS, DPI, DOC, and Children's Hospital of Wisconsin. And it outlines 10 concepts for sexual abuse prevention, specifically for youth, right? And within these 10 core concepts, we see what boosting certain protective factors could do to help prevent sexual abuse from happening in the first place. For instance, with empowerment and body ownership, one of the boxes there, one of the 10 core concepts, that's really teaching youth and young folks to have ownership and autonomy over their body, to have a healthy sense of sexuality and to not feel ashamed of what their body does, what it deserves, what it needs, and to feel that their body is their own, right? That's changing the social norm. That's changing the environment for youth to grow up with that sense of empowerment. Another box that we see right next to it is the pro-social behavior and skills. Again, that's changing the environment in which we empower youth to practice compassion and empathy for one another, to sort of see beyond the gender binary and beyond rigid gender socialization, and to really encourage not just empathy, but strong connections with their community members, with their fellow youth, with the positive relationships in their life. By boosting these protective factors, we change the environment, which addresses the root causes of sexual violence. Next slide, please. So in this picture, in the center, we have this individual person. We want to help this person build a healthy understanding of consent and attitudes about sexuality. So we introduce some concepts of consent education. So this curriculum is designed to influence their concepts of healthy sexuality. But even if your curriculum is absolutely flawless, that isn't the only influence that they have in their concept of consent. The dynamics of the relationship also influence their beliefs about consent. Social norms within peer groups and attitudes that they believe to be common among themselves also have an influence, right? So they're not just an isolated individual, they have all this other input. And so does the media that they're consuming and the laws of their community, right? So it's influence of their friends, influence of larger world. So even if you have an absolutely perfect and flawless consent education curriculum, your students are still dealing with a lot of unknown influences. And unfortunately, as we just discussed earlier, we know that rape culture is pervasive in our communities, right? In our media, in our social norms. So that's why it's really important to have that comprehensive approach to sexual violence prevention, to think about those environmental factors and boost those protective factors. So what what does comprehensive prevention planning actually mean? Could you go ahead and move to the next slide, please? Thank you. This is probably a model that a lot of us are familiar with. It's called the socio-ecological model, and it comes from the world of public health and the CDC as recognizing the different levels at which people experience influences on their health, their well-being, how they live their lives, and the things that influence the trajectory of their lives. So there's the individual level, the relationship level, the community, and the societal. I'm not going to spend too much time here because what we would like to do is look at this expanded model from the Black woman's blueprint, which recognizes that those individual relationship, community, and societal levels are very real and have a profound impact on how people live and learn and their well-being, but there's other things that are at play as well too. So we see structural, historical, and environmental rings, and through them all, we see the spiritual element. So what this is really telling us is that there's opportunity within each of these levels to do something to help prevent sexual violence, right? So we can address the influences in each one of these levels to work towards prevention. So at the structural level, right, that's an analysis and approach that focuses on the accountability by leaders who make policies and groups who benefit from the said policies, which directly and inadvertently might uphold those systems of oppression, right? So policies which perpetuate violence are often the product or manifestation of those structural isms, that bottom of the pyramid that we saw before. In the historical ring, we can focus on those historical issues such as intergenerational trauma, especially what has occurred within Indigenous and Black and Brown communities, right, where there's long-term history of instances of oppression and violence. And so there we can think about strategies that lead to shifts in the culture and community priority, where issues like sexual assaults and sexuality are addressed with protective factors as a way to respond to that long-standing historical trauma. And while the Black woman's blueprint is still sort of defining what happens with the environmental ring and the spiritual ring, what we can strongly infer here, right, is the environmental ring is really where we think about how both the built and natural environment has an impact on our well-being and on instances of sexual violence. So think about, does your neighborhood have lit sidewalks, green spaces? Is there safe public transportation, right? Those environmental, both built and natural, have an impact on our well-being, and there's opportunity for intervention there to boost those positive environmental factors to keep us safer and prevent violence from happening in the first place. So when we're thinking about these models, how can we actually put strategies into each of the levels? Well, an individual level strategy that we might think about, sorry, I'm trying to read this more closely. The individual level strategy, for instance, might be shifting personal attitudes and behaviors that are more supportive of equality and respect, right? We see that happening with one individual. In the relationship level, that could be implementing bystander intervention training, right? We see harm, we care about our fellow neighbor, we want to intervene. It might also be mentoring a skill-based program for high school students so that they have strong relationships with peers and elders that they look up to. And then we move into the community and the societal level, which is where we're going to see a lot of primary prevention in action, right? We see those root causes being addressed. So that can be implementing a social norms campaign where we have lots of imagery around our community that encourages folks to think about what profound empathy, compassion looks like, you know, in their interactions with others, the policies that they have within their larger community, within their schools that are protective of our most vulnerable community members, policies that promote fair family leave for folks who have children, for folks who are parents, equal pay, transparency in pay. Again, speaking back to what Megan's point was earlier, our primary prevention strategies might not appear extremely direct to the issues of sexual violence, but as we go further out to the bottom of the pyramid, we see how at the community and societal level, those policies and those environmental factors really do have that clear trajectory to sexual violence. And by making sure folks have what they need, such as support to raise their families in a safe and loving environment, right? Those are the protective factors that can be boosted at those levels that really do have that direct connection to sexual violence. These are some of the CDC identified protective factors that are things that could be boosted right through those levels again. So that can include the parental use of reasoning to resolve family conflict, so healthy parenting, boosting emotional health and connectedness, both with our relationships and our larger community, helping to support academic achievement and opportunity for youth, and really promoting empathy and concern for how our actions affect those around us, and really emphasizing that we all have a shared stake in making our community safer for everyone. This is just another way to think about those risk and protective factors. There's a link at the bottom of the slide there. This is a great new graphic from NSVRC that sort of puts it all together, both the socio-ecological model, risk and protective factors, and how there are different opportunities for strategies at each one of those levels to boost protective factors, change the environment, and prevent sexual violence from happening in the first place.
And then just briefly, everybody's brains work differently. So what works best for some people might not be what works best for you, and that's perfectly okay. The spectrum of prevention is another way to look at comprehensive prevention planning. And rather than grouping things by sphere of influence, they're grouped by types of activities instead. So it's just a different way to lay things out. Largely has the same aims, as you can see, somewhat similar, but it doesn't quite just like fit into one another. So just if you've been working with the SEM and it feels like it's not the best fit for you, check out the spectrum of prevention. It might be a good one for you. The Stop SB technical package is a great resource as well. Just want to mention that briefly before we have folks from local programs share. Angie, did you want to cover this slide?
Yeah, so we're not going to cover this in great detail, but this is a tool now that we've understood some theories, applications, and different ways that we can utilize addressing rape culture into our planning. This is a tool that you can use to make sure that your training is comprehensive, appropriately timed, socioculturally relevant. And there's a link down at the bottom of the slide, which you can access on our YouTube page. That will go into more detail about how you can make sure that your prevention programming is just going to be the best that it can possibly be when talking about primary prevention. And then here are some resources that we put together for y'all. Again, they're all linked, so feel free to take a greater look at these. And then at the end, we just have our contact information again for y'all. Thought we would put it in there in both places. So in case you need to reach out to us, not that you don't already have our information, but please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about how you can make your programming more primary prevention focused, or if you have any questions about what was covered, or if you would like something more, if you would like to address something more in depth with any one of us, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Yes, absolutely. So now we have folks from 2 local programs that are here to share examples of primary prevention. So we're going to hand things off to Danielle and Deann at Wise Women.
Okay. Let me share my screen here. All right, so Wise Women is located in Green Bay, and we sit close to the Oneida Reservation. So actually we have 2 buildings for our agency, and one is on the reservation, one is right next to the reservation. So a lot of our population is Native American since we live so close to the Oneida Reservation. So a lot of the youth that we actually work with are Native youth. We have some partnerships with the school districts that are around us. Oneida Nation School, or not Oneida Nation School, Oneida Nation Indian Reservation sits on 7 different school districts. So we do outreach to all of them. And so we do a lot during the school year, and then we do some summer stuff that's a little different. So I'm just going to share. Our first program we're in the middle of is a financial empowerment piece that is new for us this year. The training our staff went through, we went through back in January, I believe. We're so excited about this program. We're able to offer it. So it's called Money on My Mind. It's empowering our youth and young adults on financial independence. And our flyer here talks about the different sessions that we offer. And what we love about this curriculum is that it was created for Native populations in mind. It gives Native examples. A lot of tribes get like, they give their members like per caps. It has a whole section on that for the youth, how to manage your money, things like that. So we're super excited to be able to offer this. We're right in the middle of this right now, and my team is loving it. I think this is a game changer to create, economic justice with our people. And so we've been having some talks with like the tribal school to be able to do this with them, offer this as a class. And so we just wanted to share that's something new we're offering starting this summer. And then in July, we are going to be offering Mending Broken Hearts for Youth. This is also a Native curriculum. So Wise Women has done the adult version of this, which has been a huge success. It's very well attended. Sometimes there's a waiting list. And we were excited to be able to get trained in it so we can offer the youth component to it. And so this is for middle and high school youth. And like I said, it's an intensive healing program for our youth that helps with when we learn about, the youth learn about the boarding school impact, the intergenerational trauma, the unresolved grief and loss, and then we focus on incomplete relationships. And it helps them to develop some ongoing coping skills. And we always see a transformation every year with our youth when they participate in this program. So, and Brianna and I love doing this. We do this with our youth every summer, probably since we started. So I've been here about 4 years now. So I think we're in year 3, but it's so powerful. And even as facilitators, we heal facilitating the program. We continue to work on our healing. And what we've known is that, it's not the same relationship that we're working on every time we present. So yeah, so it's just a really good offering for our youth. And then another one that we're going to be doing this August is Understanding the Purpose of Life. It's 12 teachings for Native youth. And so here on the flyer, we have the 12 teachings. We talk about choice, drive, purpose, our gifts, signs, mind changers. So mind changers in our culture are things that alter our state of being. It could be drugs and alcohol. It could be medication, character, elders, natural order, friends, outlook, and service. And so we really go through these different 12 universal teachings. And this program is so important because of the loss of cultural identity that our community has experienced due to boarding schools. And so this is a crucial age for youth to be identity forming. So this helps build some sort of a foundation to reintroduce them to the culture or introduce them to the culture if they've not been a part of it, which a lot of our youth who attend public schools do not have any cultural identity. So this is a healing. We look at this as also a healing program for them. And then I'm going to have Brianna talk about Nash.
So Nash stands for Nurturing Identity Through Advocacy, Safety, and Healing. Initially, Nash was a girls group, but then I think it was in 2018, one of our students let us know that he was transgender, and we wanted to make sure the group was still inclusive. So we changed it from not just being a girls group, but to being inclusive of all genders. And right now the group runs virtually. But hopefully down the road we can meet in person again. And this group is for victims of crime. So that is we have a main focus on healing, goal setting, self-advocacy, skill building, and other issues that youth are facing. So something that we really like to do in this group is connect with the group maybe quarterly on what are the things you guys are dealing with right now and how can we address them. In all of our groups right now, we've been focusing a lot on values and boundaries. So helping youth, because I think we all are like, yeah, I have values, these are my values, but do we ever really sit down and take the time and like draw them out? What are my values and how do they show up in my life? And then usually after we do that lesson, then we'll look at our boundaries. So around my values, what are things I am okay with? What am I not okay with? And then how am I going to stay committed to these values? How am I going to show these values to people around me and like hold them really close to me? So this is our Nash group. And then one of the other groups that we have for middle school students is Middle School Wise Youth. And Middle School Wise Youth is a group of thoughtful young people growing as leaders and committed to helping and changing their community. So again, with Middle School Wise Youth, we focus a lot on values and boundaries, but then additionally, compassionate communication. So when I do have a value and boundary that is violated or crossed, how do I communicate that with the other person that's like effective, but also safe for me and safe for that other person? And then we use a couple other curriculums. It's okay. A couple other curriculums for Middle School Wise Youth, one of them being Discovery Dating, that was created by Bev and Alice, who are the directors of Wise Women. So teaching healthy relationships and like kind of digging deep into looking at people as partners, friends, and going back to those values that we have and like how does this person kind of reflect my values, or do they have really differing values than me? And are we going to make a good match as friends, as maybe we want to do a group project together? Do our values align? So really looking at the different relationships in our lives and seeing how we can grow them, or is this a good relationship for me or not? Ooh, that is crazy.
Right. And then, so this is a little bit of an older flyer, but we used to have a high school Wise Youth group, but now they've changed to Wise Youth Leaders. So that's their name. And it's a more of a social justice group. This group is funded through End Abuse, through the Prevention Initiative. And so the program design has changed this year. And so this group meets Mondays and then one Saturday a month, and it's virtual right now. But we are looking at social justice issues and challenging our youth to do challenges either at the school that they're at or within their community or within their family. And so like during the month of April, we talked about sexual assault awareness, and we challenged our youth to do, they were given like 10 challenges to pick from. They had to pick 3, and then they had to go out and do those challenges, and then they had to report back. And so this month they're learning about LGBTQ. And so, yeah, so this group meets year round, and, you know, we focus on different things depending on what's going on for that month. And like I said, this is for high school students. And something different this year is that we were allowed to offer them like it's a participation incentive for their time, because we want them to commit their time to this group to make change. So I think that's all we have for our youth program services. One thing I want to mention is that we do get a lot of referrals from outside agencies or within our own agency. And we are seeing a lot of youth that don't necessarily fit into one of our groups. So we, Brad and I, and another colleague of ours, we do one-on-one sessions as well, and we kind of tailor it to what they might need. We are seeing a lot of referrals come in for youth that are like elementary aged. We don't have any groups running currently, but so we are trying to meet their need by doing more of like a one-on-one. So we are complete. Thank you.
There was a question in the chat, Danielle, about some of the challenges that the Wise Youth Leaders are doing.
Oh, yeah. So some examples would be like for the Sexual Self-Awareness Month was um, like having conversations with people about sexual assault. One was looking or researching at like what are other countries doing to address sexual assault. Um, you know, a lot of them were social media focused, like, you know, committing to sharing memes or things to create that sexual assault awareness month. They're having those difficult conversations. So those are some of the examples.
And then one other thing that we do that isn't on the slideshow is we hold either once a month or twice a month parent meetings. So we invite all the parents of the youth in our programs and then parents or guardians in general. And then we share updates about our programs, but then also have a special topic. So this month we're teaching about love languages and how all of our youth receive and give love in different ways and how we can attend to that. But then also like compassionate communication we've done, the LGBTQ community and how to be good allies and just things like that to support our youth.
I have a question for both of you in terms of parental engagement. We have had conversations in our collaboration calls and our prevention calls about how engaging parents has been difficult for some programs. Can you talk about how maybe you have mitigated that, or what strategies or things that you might have done to increase parental engagement?
Yeah, so I think one of the things with a lot of our groups going virtual is that when we would do reminders, we also remind the parents. And then we would if we send out things to the youth, the parents get it so they kind of know what's going on, you know, like, hey, we learned about this, or we're going to be learning about this. And then we actually created and piloted those parent informational meetings that Brand was just talking about as a way to engage, because through some of our conversations with the parents, there was a really scary time where, especially in our community, where you know, sex trafficking was coming into our community and nobody was doing anything for the parents. Like there was no education, no awareness. And it was so COVID focused that the community lost sight of keeping our parents in the loop about what to look out for. And so that's pretty much why we started doing those, is because the parents were coming forward saying, hey, we have nothing to help prepare ourselves. I don't know what to look for, you know, so we started that. And it actually pulled in more providers, youth serving organizations. Like we have Oneida Indian Child Welfare Program. Their staff started coming to our stuff. And then, you know, that led to a really good relationship and increased our referrals. So they started referring youth over to us. And so, yeah, it's just, we're newsletters, just, you know, we have a Facebook page we created. We share that. We try to be really intentional with our content. And so I think our social media game has stepped up and we are more visibly out on Facebook. And I think that's helped a lot as far as engagement goes.
Awesome.
And a lot
Thank
of
you
it,
so much.
I was going to say
Oh, you're fine.
a lot of it is word of mouth.
Yeah.
So thank you.
No, thank you.
Okay, and now we'll turn things over to Jess at Hope House.
All right, hello. My name is Jess Kaehny. I'm the Community Education Program Manager at Hope House of South Central Wisconsin. So we are housed out of Baraboo, but we do serve 5 rural counties, kind of the counties that surround Wisconsin Dells: Sauk, Columbia, Juneau, Marquette, and Adams. And we are a dual program. And for the community education program, a lot of what we tend to focus on is also youth, and thinking about like K or even 4K through 12 presentations on like a wide variety of topics, you know. So at the elementary level, we'll talk about not only like protective behaviors and like anti-bullying or internet safety or healthy friendships, but we're also doing more around like valuing differences and self-worth and how young people can make a difference. And then building on that as they get into the middle school and high school years around consent and healthy dating relationships and dating violence and sexual assault and sexual harassment, Title IX, bystander intervention, kind of those gender roles presentations and the LGBTQ inclusivity presentation. So that's kind of what we do for young people. But I was asked to talk more specifically about Darkness to Light's Stewards of Children program. So I guess I didn't test if I'm able to share my screen. I can try to pull that up quick. So I'm not sure how familiar people are with Darkness to Light and Stewards of Children, but Darkness to Light is a national organization looking to prevent child sexual abuse. And they have an evidence-based program called Stewards of Children that teaches adults how to prevent, recognize, and react responsibly to child sexual abuse. I've been using Stewards of Children since 2009 when they had a different version than they currently do. But what I've always appreciated about Stewards of Children is that it is kind of like this prepackaged thing that you can just take and roll with. They did a really good job, I think, putting it together and making it easy for programs to use. So myself and one of my coworkers are trained on Stewards of Children, and then a different coworker was also just recently trained a couple months ago. So we're also fortunate in that aspect that we're able to, do the free one-day training and then be able to offer it to our community members. And we've had a lot of luck reaching out to different youth serving organizations, because a lot of programs are looking for something like this. It is a little bit of a longer session, which can be somewhat of a hindrance for folks who are wanting just like that quick little information. Darkness to Light says you can do Stewards of Children in 2 hours. We really prefer 2.5 hours, just so that we have enough time for questions and for evaluations, and so that we're not feeling like we're rushing through it. But in that session, there is a video that people watch, and they're going to see adult survivors of child sexual abuse. And then there is, we are provided from the Wisconsin organization Awareness to Action. They provide programs with the Stewards of Children workbooks, and we can get those for free as long as we're offering Stewards of Children for free to the community, which we pretty much always do. So then people have an opportunity to work in their workbook and do some like reflection and answering questions. And then we have group discussion about what they were just reflecting on. And then we kind of do that again, where we watch a video portion, and then we do the workbook and then the group discussion. And then at the end, people are really challenged to think about their action plan. And that, we really emphasize that this is not a training that you take and then you just say check and then you kind of forget about, that we really want people to work on, okay, now that we've talked about this, what are you going to do? How are you going to take this back to your agency, for instance, if you're a youth serving organization, and help to change policies and change the environment? Or if you're not from a youth serving agency, but you're here in the role of a parent or grandparent, what kind of conversations are you going to be having with the young people in your life? So in terms of, let's see, other things, I guess, to mention about Stewards of Children and just kind of like understanding what they cover, they focus on these 5 steps to child sexual abuse prevention. So they talk about like learning the facts and helping adults, for instance, realize that a lot of times it's someone that the child knows, and kind of understanding the grooming process. Then they talk about minimizing opportunity. And so I think that's a lot where we heard from WCASA, those conversations around changing the environment. So they ask adults to think about, either your youth serving organization, or when your child goes to camp or goes to school or goes to an after school club, what does the environment look like? And how can we help make those environments safer? How can we try to really limit isolated one-on-one situations between an adult and a child, or between an older youth and a child? And if there are those isolated kind of one-on-one situations, how can we make it safer? And they also talk about like policies and trainings, like what sort of training is being offered for like a youth camp counselor or for a school staff person, things like that. And then they have the next step is talk about it. And I really love that step. I try to spend a little bit more time on that, where it really is emphasizing, especially to parents, being able to talk to their kids about their bodies, about sex, about sexuality, about boundaries, and really trying to help take away that sense of shame. We also have conversations around like asking for affection. And so like as the parent or grandparent, you know, not just going up and hugging your kid or demanding that they give a hug to a family member, but to really role model and instill that sense of, you know, your body is your own. You don't have to give a hug if you don't want to. And then it talks about recognizing the signs that there might be something going on. So not only like the physical signs, but the behavioral signs. So maybe noticing this child's behavior is really different. Like all of a sudden they're so much more withdrawn. You know, they used to be so bubbly. Or like, why is my kid so hesitant to like work with this trainer? You know, like what's going on here? So recognizing the signs. And then also the last one is reacting responsibly. So they really emphasize, you know, believing survivors, you know, thanking them for telling you and offering support to the young person, you know, not asking a ton of questions, all those things that we want to encourage people if a young person discloses to them that they are being sexually abused. I would say that one of the feedback that I've gotten when presenting this to a Christian school, they actually reached out specifically because I had written an op-ed in the paper talking about this case in one of our school districts where it was a teacher that had a sexual relationship with a student. And it's actually just happened again in our service area. And so being able to call that out in the newspaper as like, this person can't consent, and this is a sexual abuse, and this is grooming, and this is not okay. So the school invited us to come and give the Stewards of Children program because we were talking about that as an option. And one of the attendees said that I've been through several of these types of trainings, but this is very well done, the best I've ever seen. So I feel like that's really common, that a lot of times on the evaluations, we get feedback of, I appreciate like how concrete this is. I can really like take this and, you know, roll with it. I can right away start making some changes or start having some conversations. And I would just mention as well, I noticed recently when going through this website again, the Stewards of Children program, they talk about continuing education, which is also really helpful for getting buy-in, you know, so if you do have social workers, or I saw even on here like dentists, that it's nationally approved for continuing educations for dentists. So I actually think that that might be something we might try to pursue moving forward. It just makes it a lot easier for folks to want to participate and attend. I really appreciate being able to give it at a particular organization. So like if we're going into the Boys and Girls Club and training their staff and volunteers, or if we're going into a particular school, because then as a group, they can really discuss, okay, what are the situations that we can identify where it's not as safe for young people? You know, what are some policies we might need to change? What do we need to work on in terms of our hiring process or our training process? So I feel like that's very beneficial. But we've also done it where it's just been open to the public, and, you know, kind of just said like, you know, Wednesday night, we're going to have the Stewards of Children training and anyone is welcome to come. And that's also been, I think, a nice way to, for instance, get some more parents or other people that might not, you know, traditionally work in a youth serving organization to be able to still get that same kind of information. And then, you know, in terms of the pandemic and offering Stewards of Children, people do have the option, like participants can just take Stewards of Children online, like on their own individually. It's, I think, $10 for them to be able to do, or Allie Reisman, if that's how you say her name. She's the gymnast, one of the gymnasts that came forward about Dr. Larry Nazar, if that's how you say his name. And she is working with Darkness to Light on a campaign called Flip the Switch. And so through her website, people are able to access the online training for free if they want. But during COVID, my coworker did offer to the community 2 different sessions where they could take that free online training and then have a follow-up virtual discussion with her. So it was just an opportunity for people to kind of process what they watched online and be able to talk about it as a group. So it wasn't like super well attended. We knew it would be kind of a hard sell because it's not like this post discussion is like required or anything. And it might feel like kind of that extra step of, well, why would I do that? Why can't I just take the online training? But the folks that took it, I think, found that benefit in being able to talk through kind of what they learned and what stood out to them and changes that they might make. And I think kind of builds on that sense of accountability of taking action. So yeah, I guess I would just say that I think I so appreciate Awareness to Action in Wisconsin and how they've really helped to make this program easy and free for us. You know, all that we have to do is have participants fill out a pre and a post test and then send that into Awareness to Action. So that's a pretty easy step for us to do. And when people are going through the training with us, we also provide them with different handouts from Awareness to Action and from Darkness to Light that talk about like healthy sexual development and how to talk to your kids about sex and sexuality and boundaries. And if they do, for instance, have a child that's been sexually abused, like resources in our local community that they can reach out to for support. Which I will say too, another success we've had with Stewards of Children is like around contacting the foster care coordinators in our counties and then being able to offer this to foster parents. But yeah, otherwise, besides like schools and daycares, churches, we have a group in our area called Guardians of the Children, which is like a motorcycle group. We've done a lot of work with them as they try to work against child abuse. And also just kind of like another option sometimes for offering it to the public is seeing if there are some of our different cities, either like through their Parks and Rec or like through the school, maybe they have sort of like education, like community education that's offered to anyone in the city. And so it's like a catalog, for instance, that goes out, and then like we would list Stewards of Children as one of the options. And that was a nice way to really kind of make it this concrete, credible kind of thing that's like in this catalog with other workshops of like, oh, you want to learn more about cooking, or you want to polish up on your Spanish, like, and also do want to learn about child sexual abuse prevention. So that was just kind of another avenue for trying to get the word out and getting people to attend. I would also say just being able to list this on our website. So going to Hope House's website and having that information that, you know, we provide Stewards of Children, child sexual abuse prevention, because you will often, or at least we've experienced, where people are just kind of Googling presentations or trainings in their area, and we'll have people reach out to us of like, oh, you know, I saw on your website you offer this, can you come to our group and provide it for us? So that's been pretty helpful. So yeah, I mean, this is the Stewards of Children section of the website. They also have, I think I went a little farther. They also have some additional training. So if somebody has already taken Stewards of Children, they can do these other workshops that are a little bit shorter, like on recognizing and reporting child abuse and neglect, healthy touch for children and youth. So I feel like that one's a little bit more focused on parents and guardians. Bystanders, protecting children from boundary violations. I guess that is something I kind of forgot to mention about Stewards of Children. One of the pieces on here in the training is about accountability, and when adults see other adults crossing boundaries, being able to step up and say something. So, you know, not necessarily that there's sexual abuse going on, but if I notice that my kid's uncle is kissing them and they don't want to be kissed, or, well, okay, I feel like that's not a good example. Maybe like tickling them and they didn't necessarily want to be tickled, or just standing too close to them, or things like that, making sure that it's the adult's responsibility to say something, instead of like saying to my kid, like, oh, if you don't like that, you should tell him to stop. That it really encourages like the adult to say something of like, hey, they're clearly uncomfortable, you need to stop what you're doing. So I really appreciate those kinds of conversations as a part of Stewards of Children as well. And then there's one on commercial sexual exploitation of children, and the talking with kids about safety from sexual abuse. So I also really appreciate that there's just a lot of information on the website as well that people can refer back to and get more information on, or be connected through like their emails and get updates and things like that. So.
Thank you so much. What a great way to do, like, it seems like such a great way to build bridges for outreach too.
Mm-hmm.
Such diverse partners that you work with for that.
Mm-hmm.
I also appreciate how both programs address two different populations, two different communities, focusing on youth and then also focusing on adults, because we talked about the need for our prevention programming to be comprehensive. And that's why we wanted to focus these two programs, to show you how it is incredibly important to, when you're doing your prevention programming, for it to reach all different types of folks, all different types of communities. And so I'm extremely grateful. I've learned more about your programs today. So I'm very, very thankful for you both, for both programs for coming today. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Are there any questions or comments for Jess, Danielle, or Brianne, or for us? And I realize that folks can't unmute themselves, but please feel free to put things in the chat.
I know, I feel like now that we've gotten used to the meeting version of Zoom, the webinar one feels so limiting.
I know.
And while folks are typing in the chat, another reminder, I know we've put this in the chat several times, the recording with a link to the slides, and I'll also include all the links that were shared in the chat on our YouTube page. So you are free to view the recording, share the recording, and also connect with the programs if you have any questions for them.
We have a hand up and I have the option to allow you to talk. So Maria, I'm going to allow you to talk. I hope that that's what you want by your hand being up. Oh, the hand went back down. Never mind. Oh, wait.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So there was a lady who was on here, I think it was Danielle, who Wise Women Gather, they offer the Mending Broken Hearts for Youth. I was just wondering if more of those workshops would be offered. I think the last ones were offered in July. And I was just wondering if there would be more offered beyond that, because a lot of our kids this summer in the Menominee community are doing a lot of like job training, like JTP stuff. And then a lot of them do like the sustainable leadership cohort, and a lot of those things go for 6 weeks. So they're, you know, busy doing these things like the end of this month all the way throughout July. And a lot of those programs go from like mid-morning, you know, until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'm just wanting to know if some of those are going to be offered beyond July, so we can give them the chance to possibly attend some of those, because I think that that's really crucial even for the youth in this community. Because we have things that are offered for them, but if there's a chance for them to attend something that's going to bring them healing, that can last them, you know, a lifetime, basically, they should be availed that opportunity. So just looking to see what could be available beyond July.
Right now, I don't know that we have any more scheduled. Normally, it's only a summer program, but I think if we see more of a need for it outside of summer, that's something that we could consider. And normally, if a need arises and a student can't fit into a group, we would do one-on-one. There's Danielle. Maybe she could give more insight. Oh, you're muted. The question was if we were going to be running Mending Broken Hearts like outside of summer programming because it's not available for everyone during the summer.
Yeah. Ideally, that would be amazing. And I think what Brian said was accurate. Like, we do consider doing one-on-one during the, whenever, summer or year round. It's difficult sometimes because of the calendar, the school calendars. And, we have a lot of conflict with after school programs, other programs or sports or other extracurriculars. A lot of youth are working after school sometimes. And so there's just a lot of different factors that are not allowing us to offer it more than just the once. But
I have one more question. So if we wanted to, would we be able, so I work with Minneconaughey community rebuilders in the Menominee community. And so we have a youth group, it's called Oshke Pamatase, what it means, Young People Rising. So I was wondering, since those, you said that if there was a need that you could do that, but would Minneconaughey be able to potentially like contract with you guys or do something to possibly come here at Minneconaughey and host a Mending Broken Hearts for youth? Would that be a possibility?
yeah, I think that could be a possibility. Yeah, definitely email me and I can talk to the directors about that. But we have been contracted. I mean, not necessarily my team, but our agency has been contracted to do stuff like, like bison out of. So I think it's possible.
Perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. I love these connections being made.
Oh, thank you, Danielle, for sharing that. So if folks wanted to follow up, and Maria, there's Danielle's contact information in the chat. And Marisa, also thank you for modeling that people can raise their hand, as Megan said. So if folks want to raise their hand to unmute themselves, they're absolutely welcome to.
We do have a few minutes left if there are any more questions, or we could just give folks 5 minutes back in their day. Thank you again so much to everyone from local programs, everyone attending, as well as the 3 of you for presenting. It was really, really wonderful to hear from you.
Thank you for engaging in the poll and then in the chat. We really appreciate that.
And it's so exciting to see examples of primary prevention that sort of stretch our immediate knee-jerk reaction to what that concept might be and to see it in action. So thank you so much for sharing and giving us all the opportunity to learn from you and see what it looks like in action. Wonderful. In that case, I think we'll stick around, but otherwise, if there aren't any questions, folks are welcome to hop off and enjoy the rest of their day. As I said, Megan and Angie and I will stick around if anyone has some lingering questions, but thank you so much again for joining us and have a great rest of your day all.